I previously recorded this, and as I was listening I noticed that there were lots of background noises. I suppose I should buy a mic, but I don't have one right now, so I'm just going to try to re-record it and fidget as little as possible. I am sorry about the bad audio quality. Maybe you should just turn up the volume. Anyway, the topic of the video is that love of money is the root of all evil. It's basically just some thoughts on what Jesus said. He didn't explain really what he meant by that, but I've thought about it a bit, and I'll share my thoughts. And I think money in this case may be thought of as a stand-in for material things generally, because you can use money to buy things. And from the standpoint of Christian morality, you should care more about immaterial things than about material things. So for instance, you should care more about being nice to your neighbor than about having a new car, or you should care more about knowing the truth than getting a slightly bigger paycheck or something. And I view money as a token representing a quantity of labor. So I believe wealth comes basically either from labor or what nature gives us for free. So I think it's normal if money is exchanged for tangible goods or in exchange for labor. That's normal and good. So it's normal and good if I work for my employer and they pay me, and then later I use the money to buy something that I want or pay somebody to do something for me. In that case, the money is just a way of basically saving my labor, saving the value of my labor so I can exchange it later. I think if money is exchanged and there is no transfer of goods or labor, then it's probably either theft or gambling. And it's theft in the case it's involuntary and gambling in the case that it's voluntary. So here's some examples of things that I consider to be theft and gambling. War, I suppose I consider more to be murder. The U.S. Constitution says that Congress should declare war before you fight, but the USA hasn't done that since World War II. That means from the constitutional standpoint, every single war since World War II has been illegal. And you can look up on Wikipedia about regime transfers, regime changes done by the U.S. government. I believe there were 48 of them the last time I counted, and all of them would be illegal from the constitutional standpoint. And just from a moral standpoint, if you think it's wrong to go bother somebody who's minding his own business, then all of those wars would have been immoral as well. Welfare I consider basically just to be theft. It's taking money from one person to give to another person, so there's no net benefit worked. It's theft on behalf of somebody else. I know some people think it's a Christian thing to want to give money to the poor. I think the difference between communism, which welfare is basically like that, the difference between communism and Christian morality is that whereas a Christian wants to give his own money to the poor, a communist wants to make other people give his money to the poor. And then trading, as most people do it, is a kind of gambling. If I'm going to buy low and sell high, then that means somebody else has to buy high and sell low. So there can't actually be any net increase in wealth from trading, as most people do it. I believe it is possible to do investments in a moral way. For instance, if you donate some capital to a business to help them expand or get started, then it's normal if you are entitled to a share of the profits if the business is successful. But I suppose it also means you should be willing to lose your capital if the business is not successful. So I don't consider that to be necessarily immoral, because your money is actually being put to use and you share both in the profits and in the losses of the business. So you're not getting something for nothing. If you're just buying low and selling high, though, and the price is disconnected from the business itself, which it almost always is in today's world, then it's just gambling. I tried to calculate how much money is being spent on these things, and you can see what I found on the internet. I believe capital gains tax, net capital gains were the closest thing I could think of for a measure of gambling, because if we had a fixed currency supply, in order for one person's property to be worth more, somebody else's property would probably have to be worth less, or he just bought and sold at a time in order to transfer wealth, even though the property is still there, the property is still the same, but there was still a transfer of wealth, so it's really just gambling. And it's either gambling or a measure of inflation. So I'm not really sure what portion of the money from capital gains comes from inflation and how much comes from gambling. I just included it because I figured both of the things are bad. And I couldn't find capital gains from 2020, so I just extrapolated it out from 2018 based on recent trends. And everything added together I got is $5 trillion in 2020 out of a GDP of 23 trillion. So I believe that was 23% of activity I consider to be criminal. And I didn't bother to look up other stuff other than that because it's smaller. But I figured if you account for other kinds of theft, like alimony or confiscation of property in the war on drugs, it may be reasonable to guess that about 1/4 of US GDP is spent on criminal activities, where I consider criminal to be going out of your way to go bother somebody who is minding his own business. And theft and murder would be in that. And I suppose that might not necessarily include gambling, but gambling is still not a good thing if you want to improve society generally. So why do people tolerate so much criminal activity? Probably because they think it benefits them. People who have careers in the military obviously would have a hard time advocating for a smaller military, especially the arms dealers. People on welfare don't want to end the welfare, and people who are successful traders don't want to stop trading. Personal gain is more important to them than moral principles. I don't really think hardly anyone in modern society is innocent in this regard. Everybody's trying to steal from their neighbors somehow. And I will move on to a related but important topic, the fact that our financial and monetary system is based on usury. The central banks create money out of nothing and expect it to be paid back with interest. The interest can't be paid because they only created the money to pay back the principal. So there are a number of effects from that. The most obvious is that there's always more debt than there is money by design. It's literally impossible to pay off the debt. That means either there is an unsustainable growth in the debt or inflation greater than the interest rate to make the debt more manageable. So since 1913 in the United States, we've had only periods of unsustainable growth we've had either only periods of unsustainable growth in debt or periods of inflation in order to make the debt more manageable. That's by design. It can't be any other way. Since most businesses take out loans to get started, and the money doesn't exist for them to all pay back the loans, at least some businesses have to go bankrupt in order for others to become solvent. So basically money is created out of nothing when they take out the loans. But the money to pay back the interest doesn't exist, so in order to get that money, a business has to take the money from another business. And of course this makes more businesses go bankrupt than would happen in an honest monetary system. And of course, when businesses go bankrupt, people are unemployed. So usury creates unemployment, more so than there would be naturally. And inflation in the USA makes things appear artificially expensive. This cripples domestic industries, encourages immigration, and fuels the trade deficit. For most countries, when they print money, it just drives up prices, and that's pretty much the only effect. Since the USA is the world reserve currency, there's a demand for our money overseas, which makes things a bit different. The crippling of domestic industries and the trade deficit are linked because things appear artificially expensive in the USA. It means it's cheaper to buy stuff overseas. So that means consumers in the USA basically get stuff for free from foreigners. But it's bad for workers in the United States because their labor is artificially uncompetitive. And it also encourages immigration because we have artificially high wages. And during inflationary periods, wages tend to grow slower than asset prices, and that exacerbates material inequality. So the asset prices, like a house or something, is always rising faster than your wage. It means that every year that you don't own assets, it becomes harder and harder for you to own assets in the future if you're dependent on your wages to get the assets. So to wrap it up, Jesus' teaching on money is relevant today, as I understand it. I believe a great deal of the evil being done right now is done because people love money more than they love morals, and the money changers Jesus drove from the temple are probably the same kind of people who run our banking system today. I wish Christians would take a stand against that kind of thing. That'd be really awesome, but they don't do that. That's about all I wanted to say, so I'll wrap it up.